Kia Deo Bantes. It's Cousin Leonid here. This is now the fourth time that I've recorded this because of very small errors totally on my part. So I won't go through what they were, except to say that I rather foolishly put that it was Mark 2 to 8, 2, chapter 2, verse 8, when it was in fact Luke. So let's deal with this. So we know it's, of course, after Christmas in this horrible year, which is 2020, but let's just have a look at this. So, the four Gospels, so we've got the Synoptic Gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and we've got the other Gospel, which is John, which we haven't dealt with at all so far. But we've only got two of those Gospels actually deal with the Nativity of Jesus. So those Matthew and Luke, and they deal with them not totally differently, but in slightly different ways. What is important? So it's not that Mark and John feel that the nativity of Jesus is unimportant. They just don't want to concentrate on that. That's not what's important to them. So John, for example, starts with um, the focus on the Word. So there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And Mark starts with the baptism of Jesus with John the Baptist. Okay, so both Matthew and Luke actually begin with the Nativity in slightly different ways, what is important. And one of the major differences are the people that come to pay homage to baby Jesus when he's born. So Matthew has them as being Magoi. So the Magoi were the fire priests of Persia. I think we dealt with that when we were looking at Matthew. And it shows basically that Jesus, from his very birth, is actually given some kind of authority. The fact that you actually have foreign priests come to visit him and to worship him and give him gifts is kind of showing Jesus as being special. And you also have the fact that in Zoroastrianism, so the Magoi were Zoroastrian fire priests, then they also had the concept of a Messiah and very possibly of a virgin birth as well. So it talks about Jesus being important in their religion as well. And those of us that know any Zoroastrians would know that Zoroastrians may find many of the Christian values to be similar, but they don't necessarily find the Christmas story to be similar. So we won't go into that. Okay, so the difference is that Luke actually talks about not Magoi, not about fire priests from the east coming, who are often translated as wise men or as three kings, which is totally incorrect. So we won't go into that. And Luke has them as being shepherds, so as being people who are of humble background coming to revere the birth of someone else of humble background. Not of humble background because he was born of the line of David according to the Gospels, but humble in the sense that he there wasn't any room in the guest house for them. So we'll go into that. So let's have a look. So we got Kai poimenes esan ente cora te aute agraulontes kai fulasontes fulacas tes nuctos epiten poimnen auton. So there's nothing too difficult here, but let's just go through it. So we've got the poimenes being the shepherds. So there were shepherds. Okay, so that's a good start. And now we've got a prepositional phrase. Now that preposition takes a dative case, and that's why we've got it in the dative. So we've got the te core te aute is going to be orange. So we got in that very countryside, in that very country, in that very region or something of that kind. So it's talking about the region around Bethlehem. It's talking about there being shepherds. So that is not particularly surprising that there were shepherds there. And those shepherds agrauluntes, so in the fields, being in the fields. So we can see the beginning of agralontes is agr, A-G-R, and that is related to the Greek word agros, meaning a field, so being in the fields. So it just says exactly what is happening. Next bit's a little bit more complicated, but not grammatically. So we've got the fulasontes. By the way, this blue, we can just translate it as we just did. So, or we can translate it with a phrase of something like who were. Okay. So we can see that these two go together. So, who were in the fields? There were shepherds who were in the fields. So notice the form we have is a participle, so we don't have an usi ending. So the shepherds are in the fields or anything like that. We have there were shepherds who were in the fields. Okay, and the next one, we got fulasontes, that comes from the word fulator, or possibly a much older form is fulacor. Okay, and we can see that we have the next word is fulakas. Okay, and this is an example of polyptyton. Okay, so those are two words which have the same root, but they have different forms. So we've got the fulasontes is going to be the verbal adjective, so the participle, and the fulakas is going to be a noun, but they're basically from the same root. So it's something to do with guarding. So we've got fulasontes, guarding, and they were guarding, who were in the fields and were guarding. Okay, and the fulakas. Now let's have a think about that. Fulakas, we're told in most Koine Greek dictionaries would mean something like watches, and we've got the genitive tes nuktos of the night. So they were keeping an eye, they were marking time is basically what it is, or maybe even keeping awake. So fulasontes, keeping an eye on the watches of the night. Okay, epi ten poimnen auton. So we said that that green colour signals possession. So the watches of the night's watches. And we've got auton and poimnen. So the poimnen is their flock, and so the auton is of them, their flock. So we got the epi is something like for, on behalf of. It's often translated into English as something like who are watching over their flock during the night, which is not an incorrect translation. It kind of gives an idea of the idiom that is implied, but not necessarily the grammar. So we got keeping an eye on the watches of the night on behalf of their flock. So obviously you keep awake to keep an eye on your flock so they don't get eaten by some wild creatures. Okay, and we have in the Bible, throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, Christian New Testament, we have examples of shepherds and we have examples of looking after a flock as being an example of dedication. So, dedication, and we actually have the example in the Old Testament of David actually talking to Saul, the King Saul, and actually saying that he is employed looking after the flocks of his father. Okay, so we'll go through that one more time. And there were shepherds who were in the fields in that particular region, in this very region, and they were guarding their flocks during the night, or watching over the watches of the night on behalf of their flocks, so they're staying awake. And that's all we really need to say on it. So we'll stop there. If there are any questions, just leave me something in the comments and we can go through that. And until then, I hope you have a very happy Boxing Day. Okay. Kia rete.